There is so much fraud, waste, and abuse. It's everywhere.
No agency in the federal government wastes money like the Department of Defense.
The DOD has never successfully passed an audit.
Come on, never?
Never.
There we go.
The stuff that they lose in the couch cushions is like $20-30 billion a year. They just don't know where it went. It's gone.
In my world, if I give you $1 billion and you can't tell me what happened to it, that's waste.
How is that waste?
President Trump, along with Elon Musk and his team at DOGE, have their sights set on reining in waste at the Pentagon.
Check the military. We're going to find hundreds of billions of dollars of fraud and abuse.
But so far, this is what DOGE has to show for its efforts.
We believe that these initial findings will probably save $80 million in wasteful spending.
A grand total of less than 0.01% of the total defense budget. So what exactly is the Pentagon doing with $900 billion? We spoke to people who audited the Defense Department.
We have real estate that they can't account for. Real estate. I mean, this is a piece of land.
An insider at a major defense contractor.
All of my effort is really just flowing taxpayer monies up into these billionaires in charge of the whole thing.
And military spending experts to find out where the real waste and abuse is in our defense budget. What they reveal is that the biggest source of waste is hiding in plain sight. And it could get even worse.
We want the biggest, most badass military on the planet.
Almost every audit I did was very obviously a wasteful project in one way or another.
Paul Kennedy worked as an auditor for the Department of Defense Inspector General's Office, an agency tasked with preventing waste, fraud, abuse, and mismanagement. One of the programs he audited was the F-35, the most expensive weapon system in history with a total lifetime cost of over $2 trillion.
We were trying to see if they were managing their spare parts program, the best they can, and saving money whenever they can.
But what they found was often the opposite.
This is a report on the F-35 repair parts process.
Paul's report revealed that $34.5 million worth of spare parts were thrown out without approval.
We didn't watch it get destroyed. We don't know that it was actually destroyed. We don't even know if that was bad. We just simply know that there's a part here that you say was beyond economical repair, and you got rid of it. That would be like borrowing my car and selling the radio out of it because it didn't work anymore. No, you need my permission to do that.
Between 2018 and 2023, over 1 million spare parts for the F-35 worth over $85 million were lost, damaged, or destroyed, according to a GAO report. So how exactly does the government get away with so much waste? Well, it's not the government doing it. The F-35 is made by Lockheed Martin, a multi-billion-dollar company and the US's biggest defense contractor.
Going back to the Revolutionary War, essentially, there have always been military contractors. One of the things that happens with defense contracting more than any other contracting with the federal government is something called a cost-type contract. The contractor is reimbursed for any what they call reasonable cost plus some kind of profit.
So if the government wants to build a new military aircraft like the F-35, it will pay a private company to design and manufacture it, and all the costs that go along with the project.
They then have no incentive to reduce costs because they know they're going to be reimbursed, and then on top of that, there's a profit built in that the government will pay.
Since 2001, government spending on private military contractors has tripled, despite evidence that contractors aren't always using taxpayer dollars wisely. To find out exactly what companies are doing with this money, we talked to someone on the inside.
And I work at a major U.S. defense contractor. These defense contractors, they're there to make a profit, bottom line.
The defense industry is controlled by 5 main companies, siphoning billions of dollars from the government every year. These companies regularly outperform the S&P 500 and have profit margins between 9 and 20%.
Now that doesn't seem like a lot when you're just looking at it percentage-wise, but when you're talking about billions of dollars, that is a ton of money.
And for big projects, the government isn't paying these margins for just one company.
Prime contractors, they want their 9 to 20% of the contract, and underneath them, the sub wants 9 to 20%, and then it goes on and down below. And so you have this compounding effect. Some contractors literally are just integrators of subcontractors. A lot of times they don't do fucking shit. They just put the thing together when they're done. Say, here you go, now give me my 20%.
Jeff estimates that when you add it all up, roughly 30% of the total cost of the project is just profit for contractors and subcontractors. That would mean that just last year, almost $134 billion of government funding was just profit for private companies. So how is it that these companies can get away with spending so much of the government's money?
These contractors have a lot of power over the contracts because they're the only ones that can do it.
General Dynamics are the only company that produces the Abrams tank. When the U.S. military wants to buy more Abrams tanks, they don't have to compete that contract. They always give it to General Dynamics. They are the only one. General Dynamics would have no incentive to reduce or contain the cost of the Abrams tank if there's no one competing for that contract.
But contractors didn't always have so much power over the government. Back in the 80s, there were dozens of companies that would compete for defense projects. But in the 90s, the Clinton administration cut defense spending and facilitated a wave of mergers until there were just 5 major players. They argued this would make the industry more efficient, and that outsourcing more work to contractors would save the government money.
We've got some good people coming out, some really good people, huh?
But instead, the top 5 contractors took advantage of their monopoly power.
The big shift that has happened is that contractors are now providing more and more services, things that the military did used to do for itself.
Companies realized that offering the government services, things like designing software or maintaining equipment, could mean decades of competition-free work at relatively high profit margins. And that's exactly what we've seen happen.
In setting up the contract for producing the F-35, they couple with that a lifetime service agreement. So Lockheed Martin is the only company for the remainder of the lifespan of that piece of equipment that can service that equipment. The military itself can't even service parts of that equipment because it's proprietary. So the military becomes vulnerable and dependent on this firm, and this firm has a complete monopoly.
In 1990, the DoD paid out $29 billion in service contracts, $67 billion when you adjust for inflation. By 2023, that number had grown to $166 billion.
Economically, the DoD has become dependent on this model. So the more that they've used contracts and contractors, the less expertise they have of their own and the less capability they have of their own to produce those same products or provide those same services.
Research going back over a decade suggests that you could save tens of billions of dollars a year by actually bringing core government functions, administrative functions, back inside rather than outsourcing them to service contractors.
It seems like this would be a simple fix, but there's a problem.
The arms industry has been incredibly successful at politically engineering weapon programs such that very few lawmakers in Congress are prepared to challenge them.
The defense industry strategically spreads out manufacturing across the country, making Congress members defend manufacturing things we might not even need because it keeps jobs in their district. The Big Five also make political donations to the congressional representatives who decide how much the DoD gets to spend every year. All of this puts pressure on Congress to raise the defense budget.
This is an outstanding piece of legislation, and I strongly urge everybody to support it.
Even if it means continuing expensive projects, and even when the Department of Defense fails to pass an audit.
I'm proud to say the Republicans secured a 6% funding increase over last year's funding level.
If you go back to the very beginning, the DoD was stood up to defend this country. We are not interested necessarily in how well we account for our property as long as we win whatever that conflict might be. The American people are getting a little bit less and less supportive of that, especially when we see how quickly we can waste so much money.
Trump, along with Elon Musk, has made cutting government spending a hallmark of his second presidency.
I think he's going to find $1 trillion.
Yeah.
We welcome DOGE at DOD. We will partner with them, and it's long overdue. The Defense Department's got a huge budget, but it needs to be responsible.
But so far, DOGE has focused on cutting federal employees and DEI programs.
Look at some of the initial things that we found in the Air Force. $1.9 million for holistic DEI transformation and training.
And they haven't touched anything related to the billions in spending on defense contractors.
So when you see Elon Musk or DOGE going after the federal workforce, that is a fraction of the federal budget. And in many cases, not all cases, those federal employees carry out services much cheaper than private contractors do.
The Pentagon plans to cut up to 70,000 civilian employees. Senator Roger Wicker, the head of the Armed Services Committee, is advocating to reduce regulations on weapons contractors.
These rules and regulations and protections are there for a reason. And these government organizations aren't there to try and fuck people. They aren't there to make these rules just because it makes it harder. There's a reason that it's there.
The problem with Wicker is that he identifies issues correctly, but he comes to all the wrong conclusions because he has stakes in the game.
Wicker notably was the largest recipient of defense industry campaign contributions of any Senate candidate.
If you give these companies free rein without having these people overseeing them, what's to stop them from doing something like planned obsolescence on things like weapon systems or body armor, that just disintegrates after X amount of uses? It would definitely increase their profits because then they would have to keep going back and buying more. So if you open a little bit of door there, they will flood through and take as much as they can.
The sort of push to deregulate as means to increase efficiency is completely contrary to reality and history. And I just can't emphasize enough how bad of an idea it is to deregulate budgeting and acquisition. This will only improve contractors' ability to overcharge the military and the taxpayer.
Year after year, what has been found is something in the range of 30 to 40% of contract spending goes to waste, fraud, and abuse. So the first thing would be at least to reduce the services that are being provided by contractors, to have fewer opportunities for contract dollars to get misused because fewer of those dollars will be going to contractors.
If Trump's goal is to cut $1 trillion from the federal budget, defense spending on contractors is one of the best places to look. But reining in waste here would take an investment in government oversight, not cuts. And more fundamentally, it would require a shift away from the corporate interests that have captured lawmakers and the Pentagon for decades.
We know what the holes in the law are, but we will never truly understand the scope of the issue unless Congress changes their tune on military contracting. That would require many of them to turn away from the very industries that supports them in more than one way.
The amount of money that the executives make and profit, all of that money is essentially taxpayer money that's been flowed out through the company and then just goes right into their pockets. That amount of money could go into social safety nets or be reinvested back into the industry, or even just given back to the taxpayer as tax cuts to working people.
If you're solely concerned about military readiness, as our Secretary of Defense claims to be, then you would look at what more spending, how that's actually impacted the acquisition process and military service members. And the answer is acquisition outcomes have been getting worse and worse. All it does is enrich military contractors and their executives and shareholders.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe to see more videos like this one. And if you have ideas for stories you want us to cover next, leave them in the comments.